a lot of schools have gone to test optional, right? So students can
Mhm.
sort of avoid the standardized tests. But it turns out that the standardized test scores starting to make a comeback. There's a lot of merit aid that actually depends on the test score. And more importantly, life turns out it's not test optional.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Office Hours, where we explore the key trends shaping higher ed and what those trends mean for students and families. I'm really excited about today's episode with Mark Salisbury, where we talked all things price transparency in the financial aid process. There's a lot of really great tips and some really practical advice for students and families that you're not going to want to miss. Let's jump right in. Hey everyone, my name is Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360, and I'm really excited to be joined today by Mark Salisbury. He's the co-founder and CEO of Tuition Fit, a tech platform that's tackling the issue of financial transparency in college admissions. Welcome, Mark.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's kick things off. One of my favorite things in college admissions and financial aid is myth busting. So I'm curious, Mark, from your perspective, what do you think the biggest myth that students and families have when it comes to paying for college?
I think it's a really good question, and there's probably more than one big one. But certainly, uh, a lot of people are just sort of gobsmacked by the sticker prices they see, and they just assume that most people are paying something like that or close. They don't know any different, and maybe they're first generation families, or the last time they talked about college is when they went to school as parents, right? 25 years ago. So I think that one of the first things is just that college is um it is must be the price that is being advertised. And so there's an awful lot of folks who as a function of that, even with their seventh grader, eighth grader telling them you're just not going to go to that type of college, or you're just not going to go to a 4-year college. And that gets embedded into the student's mind from early on, and that then shapes all kinds of other decisions that they make, um, that sometimes become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy about readiness to go to college, right? Um, but I think for sure that that notion of what college actually costs, that this idea that all colleges are super expensive, is really creating an awful lot of problems and a major barrier for people to get over.
Yeah, you bring up a great point that even for, parents, maybe their college experiences is like, a few decades ago, when environment was a little bit different. What do you think has changed like between now and then just to create this situation where, this high, very high sticker cost and in some cases high discount model, creates a real like abstraction in pricing? How do you think this happened?
Well, the high price, high discount sort of philosophy was really starting to gain favor in the 90s. And that's when a lot of parents were in college, right? Parents that are sending their kids off to college now, they went to school in the 90s, early 2000s. And so for them at that time, the sticker prices weren't anything close to what they are now. And then it was still relatively common to pay the sticker price then. So the number of students that were getting financial aid packages um, were relatively small, all things considered. And more of that aid was being given out based on assessment of need, not merit. And so that's one area that things have really shifted. Right underneath that is this notion of, so if you're a parent and you're looking back then, it was much more common that you would have to then apply separately for scholarships at that school, right? You'd submit your application, but then attempting to try to get any merit aid, any kind of other scholarships, there was a whole other application process that you would have to track down and find and do separately, maybe 3 or 4 times. Um, and today, the application itself is essentially the de facto application for virtually all institutional scholarships, right? So all of the things that were different then as a function of the very early years of this high price, high discount model, um, have set things up to be just very different now than they were then.
Yeah, that's a really great point about I mean, I remember applying to college and we yeah, had a whole separate application with separate essays, and for merit scholarship specifically, and it was a
Right.
very different process. Whereas, yeah, now, I mean, many schools will have even like a matrix on their website, or
Mhm.
merit baked into their net price calculator, even just to give because it is like a pretty predictable process based off of like GPA and maybe test scores, maybe a few other data points.
Right. It's you know, all of the different tools that have been added over the past 25 years, they were intended to provide more clarity, and in many ways, um, ended up just creating more complexity. The net price calculators, for example, the evolution of the merit aid, sort of the monster, the biggest part of aid that gets handed out now. Um, if you read carefully, at most schools, they will say something like up to X number of dollars in aid with a minimum of this GPA, this test score. There's still a lot of wiggle room in there that you just don't know.
Mhm.
The net price calculators, when they first came out, schools were treating them just like the financial aid offer letters that you would get out, and they would weave the loans and even big chunks of plus loans into the results that came out of the net price calculator, because from the school's perspective, this was still a lead generation, furthering down the tunnel mechanism, right? To get more people further down the funnel of ultimately getting them to apply, get admitted, and enroll. So the clarity that the public was looking for to help them decide not to apply to this school or to that school, the school's goal was exactly the opposite: keep you in the funnel, right? And so, as a function of a lot of these technological changes and advances, this decision about, is this school going to fit my price range, has just become that much more difficult.
Yeah, I'm curious, are there colleges that you think are good examples of being leaders in price transparency, or just for folks out there, where you might like look to
There's a
example?
I mean, what the funny thing is that the schools that are the most transparent and the easiest to sort of figure out are essentially the most selective and hardest to get into, because they stick to a need formula. They don't give out any merit aid because they really don't have to. And now they announce, if your income's below X, 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is now, that you'll get all tuition paid for. And then the net price calculator that they have is pretty accurate because it's fairly simple and connected to their own formula. Of course, when you only accept 5% of the applicants, it's sort of a moot point, right? But those schools, in a lot of ways, they're the simplest, um, in terms of just because they can afford to be and they don't actually have to be anything else. The schools that are not so lucky, that are becoming more clear, are they'll either offer a pre-read. So College of Worcester was one of the first ones to do this, where you can actually call them up, meet with their financial aid office, and they'll actually walk you through what their offer would be to you. Um, or this transparency initiative that's related specifically to award letters. There's been some real developments there. One that I saw this year, was from Lawrence University up in Wisconsin. They just had a really nice, simple layout of their financial aid offer letter, that made it very clear. Those are nice, but it's kind of backwards for the shopper, right? The shopper wants to be able to say, I got X number of dollars to spend. Which school should I look at? The system right now, even with some of these advances, you still have to go to the individual school to find out what their price would be. And that's not how a shopper wants to shop when there's thousands of options.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think you really get at it that schools there's, obviously constraints for every school has different, resources. Definitely there's things I think that could be improved on the like award letters. Like it is, I think it was maybe Brookings a few years ago did an analysis and just like all of the different ways that like certain student loans were explained and all the different formats. It just makes it very confusing. But at the end of the day, it's this model where, you know, you don't find out what it costs until you're, 6 months into your senior year of high school or whatever, and you're getting ready to make a decision, and you've already applied to all the schools. So you've sort of, have your, limited options.
You've already made a whole series of
Yeah.
decisions, right? That you are hoping work out, but once you know, part of the driver that makes this so hard is this what psychologists call choice overload, where there's a whole bunch of colleges at the very beginning, right? And they look a lot more similar than different, right? To the sort of uninitiated. And the student's just trying to get from a couple of thousand to 20. And that choice overload anxiety makes it real tempting to just very quickly pick 20 that I've already heard of or that I know somebody who went there and liked it. And then I'll focus there, narrow that down a little bit more, and maybe I'll apply to 15. At that point, you sort of have moved on from the rest of anybody else. Well, if those 15 are the ones that are actually going to be a lot more expensive than you need them to be, at that point, we're really sailed far past where the consumer would like the situation to be.
Yeah, that I think that's a really great overview of the problem. And I guess this would be a good point. I'd love for you to share a little bit about tuition fit and how you're sort of thinking about solving this problem, flipping it around a little bit.
Sure. Well, the premise for tuition fit starts before we even start talking about pricing. It starts with all of the research on college students and success after college. And there's 60 years of this research now. And it very clearly says that what you do in college is the thing that's going to define your success after college. We all know, if we're honest, we all know of somebody we can think of who arguably got dumber while they're in college, right? We all know that person, right? And it's 4 years of choices. You can either just do the minimum and get by, or you can really invest yourself and get a lot out of it. And it turns out that the folks who really invest themselves and get out of it are successful regardless of the school they went to. So if you start from there, then the next question is, well, how would I get the best ROI? Well, I would start by spending the least amount that I could spend, relatively speaking, right? And from that position, we started to say, well, then let's give people the ability to actually do that. And it really starts by challenging that sort of core belief that, if you don't pick the college that's just the right college fit for you, that somehow, you're going to be a homeless under a bridge 10 years later, when we just know that that's not true. And so that was really the impetus behind this whole project. And the next evolution of that has been playing a role in helping the public really shift to an ROI mindset, to really seeing that they're the drivers of their success. The student is actually the driver of their success in and after college. It's not because they've got a brand name stamped on their chest that makes them successful. It's what the student does. And that's kind of the message that we would like all of our kids to think anyway, right? So once you sort of put those two things together, that sets up a need for the ability to very simply find the schools that fit your price range, whatever that price range is, and to then be able to evaluate value.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think the connection of the the affordability on one hand and then the return on your investment of time and money. I think That's so key. And I think, yeah, appreciate that reframing and the reminder to folks that there's like many schools that you know can be successful at, that can, you know, launch you to a wonderful life and career. I think, you know, for better for worse, we collectively media are very focused on a very small sliver of higher ed in this country, that is not representative of, you know, where most folks are going to school. Um, do you have
Certainly true. I live out in the Midwest, and, it's go to the big public institution in your state or maybe a small school that's down the road, but, it's the big brand name schools on the East Coast and the West Coast. uh, They're far enough away that around here, it's a different conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's another important point, that college admissions, I think there's this perception that students are going all over the country to go to school, and it still is fairly local where students are going within, you know, I forget what the stat is. It's, you know, X number of miles from their hometown. You know, many students are, you know, doing 2-year degrees and, you know, going to schools in their backyard. Not that there's anything wrong with going out of state, but I think there is a bit of a distorted picture of like what actually happens.
Yeah, I think there are so many myths that we've gotten built into this whole ecosystem, and you have to take a little bit of time to unpack that stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure, and hopefully we're doing a little bit of that today. I'm curious, Mark, are there any favorite success stories you have, from students on Tuition Fit who, you know, have, you know, just used the tool really successfully, have saved a lot of money, maybe they started off their process one way and it wound up going in a very different direction. I'm curious about that.
Sure, there's really two stories that stand out to me, amongst of the many that we've been fortunate to contribute to over the past 6 years. But one of them was, I was asked to come to a high school in the Chicago area and give a presentation to a classroom, of students who are in a program called AVID, which is a program in high schools mostly for students that are coming from low income backgrounds, and talking about and encouraging post secondary opportunities. And this was a classroom of ninth graders. And in that classroom, there were a couple of young guys who were not afraid at all to tell me right up front, I'm not going to college. We can't afford it. My parents have said we can't afford it, and it won't matter because we have too much debt. It doesn't matter. And they were kind of the belligerent ninth graders, I guess. And so I sort of said, well, okay, well, what's a price tag that you think you could afford? And of course, the answer was, well, give me college for free. And so we started asking, well, what's your GPA? Um, and this student was a pretty good student. He was 3.5 or 3.6 in his freshman year. And so we started to say, well, okay, um, let's make some presumptions about the kind of need-based aid you'll qualify for. This was a student in Illinois where they would get both the Pell Grant and then the MAP Grant, which is a state program that's similar to the Pell that awards actually just a little bit more than the Pell Grant. And so as a combination of that, you've got pretty nice pile of money there for a low income student to put towards school. And I started to show this student how what was about $14,000 at the time would essentially easily pay for a community college and pay for some of the regional public institutions after some of the merit aid that he would have qualified for with a 3.5 GPA. And so all of a sudden, the notion of I can't go to college, it's way too expensive, was just not supported by the data at all. It was completely contradicted. And he was a little bit shocked. And what I found out later was right after class, he went to the school counselor and said, I need to get into classes that are preparing me for college because I signed up for classes for the next semester that are just assuming that I won't, take the more challenging math and the honors and everything else. And he actively changed his academic trajectory
I love that. Yeah.
The plan for college because we debunked this myth in ninth grade. And that just stood out to me because for that student, there's thousands of others for whom this is the scenario that plays out. They've already assumed they're not going to be able to pay for college because they think all college is too expensive. And so then they make choices and they take the courses that aren't going to be as challenging, because why would you want to take something that's more challenging if you're not going to go to any school after high school? You just got to graduate, right? And he recognized how his trajectory could change and opportunities could change just as a function of having this, which would started as a sort of belligerent, you're not going to prove me wrong moment, which, is always sort of fun when you're talking to ninth grade boys. So that's the one kind of story. The other kind of story is the families that have gone through the process. They're now later in the admission process. They've got accepted. They've got some prices that are now way outside of what they think they can do. And they use Tuition Fit to make sense of their award letters, see what their prices are, and then see what's going on in the market for students like them. And suddenly you can just see over and over, there's this level of sort of, wait a minute, I've been allowing myself to have really no power in this conversation about price. Maybe I have more than I think. And we've worked with and spoken to numerous families where they had no idea that they could push for a better price from a particular school. They had no idea that they had any influence or the ability to use multiple offers that they've gotten from different schools to go back to the one that they really liked and say, you know what, we're really interested, but the price you're offering makes it really hard to justify. And then the school doing what any smart admissions office would do is to say, let's find a way to get you to where you can say yes, instead of just saying, oh, well, I guess we lost them. And students ending up in schools that arguably a better fit, arguably more confident about going there, more excited about college, and the college having a student that they didn't think they would have or wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah, no, and that's I think a great call out. Just there's obviously I'm very like love that those examples are on very, very different ends of the spectrum. Ninth grade versus like a second semester senior who's already gone
Right.
through the admissions process. Um yeah, two follow-ups from that, Mark. I'm curious, when do you think the ideal time for families to start having this, conversation about paying for college? And college cost? When do you think that ideally would start if it was like, your perfect world?
Yeah, I think that conversation has to be really at the fundamental beginnings of what are we doing after high school? And I actually suggest to families to reframe it a little bit, because it's just too easy. A 15, 16-year-old kid being a 15, 16-year-old kid and wherever they are in terms of their maturity, which is not 100% there yet, right? It's too easy if the parent comes in and just says, okay, we don't have the money to pay for everywhere, so you can't have any place that costs more than X. Even if it just comes off like that, even if the parent says it in a more nuanced way, it's just so easy for the student, the young person, to hear it in a way that ends up pitting mom and dad against the student, right? And anybody who's a parent knows that as soon as that's happened, you got a lot of work to do that is really not that much fun as a parent. So, what I suggest to parents is, yes, we're going to talk about costs right out of the gate, but we're going to frame it differently. We're going to frame it as, I, as your parent, want for you a life in which the moment you launch as a young adult after college or after whatever educational path you take, the moment that you launch, you are thriving emotionally, intellectually, physically, and you have the financial freedom to explore any opportunity that might come along that you don't expect, even as crazy as it might be. You have the financial freedom to do that. So for that to happen, yeah, we got to find a good post-secondary opportunity that's the right match for you in a bunch of different ways in terms of where you want to go or how you want to develop. But we have to make sure that when you finish that and launch into the next phase, if you don't have a whole bunch of financial freedom, i.e., if you have a lot of debt that has to get repaid, you won't have the kind of freedoms that you're going to want to have, not just to go out with your friends on the weekends and go visit somebody on the other side of the country because you just want to, but to say, you know what, I've been doing this business job for a couple of years and I'm not liking it like I thought. I kind of like being a teacher. Maybe I want to go and do that. If you don't have a bunch of debt, you could just go and take that hard left, be more realized as a person and follow that path. So the debt part is going to limit those kinds of opportunities, which are just going to show up when you're in your mid 20s. And so if the parent frames it that way with their student, the student is certainly going to say, yeah, I want that too. Absolutely, I want that. So now let's go together to make sure that we preserve that financial freedom while we look at what other opportunities we're going to look at. And then you've got mom and dad and the student on the same side of the table solving the problem together. And you have now sort of shaped this thing to say, okay, there's a lot of options out here. We're just going to make sure that we don't step in a pothole as we go. That's just the one thing we're going to prevent. And doing it that way, I have found really helps to make sure that you cover that cost thing, but you frame it in a way that keeps everybody teamed up and going in the same direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great reminder. And I think something parents can be really, they can be really, really helpful with helping their student just think beyond the 4 years, just because it's, yeah, to your point, it's jobs, it's, your location, like later in life, maybe it's, starting a family, mortgage, all types of other, like, big life decisions, other financial commitments, that, can definitely be, impacted by having a large amount of student loan debt.
Right.
So I think that's a
Now, let's
really,
be honest, as a parent, I want to be an empty nester. I want the freedom to be able to turn that bedroom into a sun porch if I feel like it. I'd love that, right? Not that I don't love my kids, but I want them to launch and to be on their way and have that financial freedom. So, selfishly, I want the same thing.
yeah, no, absolutely. I will. We have our daughter's 6 months old. So I have no idea what college is going to look like. And I think about college cost, just like you kind of track that for the next like 17 years, it gets to a scary place, but I guess we'll see. um, I'm also curious to kind of dig into the appeals process. And I think for some students, I completely agree. I think that's, that is there's such an opportunity there. And I think just students don't know how to approach that exactly. So it sounds like one of the tactics can be, okay, I received perhaps some more favorable financial aid offers or scholarships at some other schools. What are some of the other ways students should be thinking about financial aid appeals, and kind of setting that up for success?
Well, I think the first thing that students just have to be reminded of, and families too, is that you don't have to sort of just defer power to colleges. Colleges don't operate on a higher moral plane than students and families. It's a marketplace. One is selling something, the other's buying something. You both need each other, but one's not sort of by, you know, some deity hasn't decided that one's better than the other, right? And I think that that's really important at the core because, students tend to sort of approach this process of deferring power, like, please accept me to your school and I hope I can get in, and then I just want to be a part of your group, and instead see it as, I am a consumer. I am going to be paying a lot of money I or we as a family are gonna be paying a lot of money for this opportunity, and I'm gonna be the one that makes myself successful down the road. I'm gonna be happy to be an alum of school X or Y or Z, but it's because of my work that's ultimately gonna be the reason I'm successful. And so I need to really make sure that I get the best value out of this. And every penny I pay for this is penny that I don't have for something else. And so I do think that it's just really important for families to start with that mindset and really just check themselves to make sure that they just aren't sort of deferring without really realizing that they're doing that. The second thing then is to say, um, don't treat this as if it's a used car sales experience because it's a lot deeper than that, right? Be genuine. Like there's a school that you're going to feel like, you know what, this place just doesn't work for me. It's just not going to work. There's another place that, you know what, it could work, but it'll take a little bit of this extra stuff that I'll need to bring and I'll have to supplement with some other experiences. And then there's this other school that's got all the stuff and then a bunch of stuff that I don't really need. And it doesn't make sense to pay a bunch of extra for the stuff I'm not going to use or need, right? Um, but be genuine and know what those trade-offs look like for each of these schools. And then make your case to say, I every extra $1,000 is more than $1,000 if I'm borrowing it, because it's going to cost you more than that by the time all the interest is accrued to pay it back. I mean, this is real costs. So if you're going to have to borrow to go to school, that's a situation where you say, like, need matters here. And take a stand for yourself. Maybe the school's not going to recognize it. Maybe the school just simply can't go less expensive than they are at. But just because they can't doesn't mean you can't still articulate the need that you have. So I think that one of the things to start with is from that standpoint of we're on an even playing field here, and I'm a consumer that has just as much right to get what I need as the school has the right to ask for what they need. Then from there, you put yourself in the best position you can, either because you have multiple offers from other schools that you now recognize all could work well, or because the cost the school's asking you to pay is more than what you believe you can pay. Make your case. State that, look, cost matters here. And, one of the things that schools pay attention to is if there's been recent changes in your family's financial situation. And goodness sakes, over the past 5 years, I don't know of anybody who hasn't had some change in their financial situation, whether it was implications of the pandemic, or if it's been the economy, or whether it's now prices going up and up because of the way that the economy and the federal government's deciding to do things. Those are realities. Make that case. And at the end of the day, know what will work for you and take a stand with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that families should know kind of like what their number is. And I think kind of going in instead of just being this kind of like open-ended question, having a sense of like what is doable, what's not, and putting a lot of that like work in beforehand. I think a great reminder just there is like, it seems like there's this like power asymmetry. And you still have agency. And I think especially now with like, what's going on in the admissions world right now is that the largest high school class for a while has graduated. High school classes starting this year will be smaller, and I think just that means that schools are going to have to compete for students more, which that is probably a positive for students, who just will have a little bit more power in the process. So I think, yeah, really great advice for helping students think about and families think about, appeals. And we'll also link in the show notes to Tuition Fit, which, clearly can be a really great tool, as you look for, putting together a really great case, for your financial aid appeal as well. Um, so as we wrap things up, I want to get to, a couple of like more rapid fire questions. One is, aside from Tuition Fit, what's one like resource or tool that you find yourself recommending to students and families frequently?
Just because you find a school that's your price tag, that's just the first step in success, right? And what we know about talk about other myths in the world of higher ed, there's this mythology that the freshman year is just this wonderful, wonderful, happy, joy experience. No, actually, a lot of times the freshman year is really hard. And it's really hard because you're walking into an entirely new experience and you don't really know the rules, right? You just don't really know the rules of the game, right? And learning them on the fly means making a lot of mistakes. So there's a couple of different resources that I find myself pointing people to really almost every time I have a conversation about, okay, you found a school, great, now what? One, there is a board game. Believe it or not, there are board games, right? Those things that you had when you were like pre-internet, um, called Crash Course. And it is essentially a way to play the first semester of college. And you learn about all the ways that college actually works and the trade-offs you have to make and how you need to sort of manage just the way you think about yourself and your friendships and your time and all of these things. And it's a low stakes but really smart way to experience a first year without the trauma of what happens when you realize you failed a midterm, right? So Crash Course is a wonderful board game, and they're going to be coming out very soon with a video game version of the game on a browser. So I'm a huge fan of that game and the folks that built it. There's another guy who I really like the way he does helping people through the first year, that transition to college. A guy named Harlan Cohen, who some people may know from his Naked Roommate books. But he does a great job of just helping people through the course of that first year and giving them a resource to talk to and insights. So much of succeeding in college is knowing the sort of unwritten rules of the game, right? And it's so different than high school that unless somebody teaches you this stuff, you just don't know you don't know. So I've become a big fan of really pointing people to those kinds of resources, and those two are ones I really like.
Cool. I'll definitely check out Crash Course. And yeah, I remember, gosh, must have been like the Naked Roommate like 20 years ago when I was going to college. Yeah, I didn't realize he is like, yeah, very active on still like, working on that on big huge Instagram following. So we can also drop that in there. Um, Another question, what is one like really actionable thing students and families can be doing right now to set themselves up for success?
Well, let's see. If you're a family that has an 11th grader who's, um, let's say 11th grader starting like next week, which I actually have. So, this is very poignant, right? For me is this, I've really found that like, it's never too early to start talking about what's going to happen after high school and imagining what you really want that world to look like, and then to walk it all the way back to say like, okay, so what should we start doing now? And for us in my family, one of the things we've started to talk about is how can you really start to prepare your mind for taking some standardized tests? um, Standardized tests are just not the same as they were when, I'm an older dad. So when I went to college or went to high school, you had a lot more standardized tests and there were a lot more high stakes tests. Now I don't think students get that as much. And a lot of schools have gone to test optional, right? So students can
Mhm.
sort of avoid the standardized tests. But it turns out that the standardized test scores starting to make a comeback. There's a lot of merit aid that actually depends on the test score. And more importantly, life turns out it's not test optional. You're going to have to take standardized tests in college, and you're absolutely going to have to take them in your professional life. So being good at taking standardized tests and being able to perform on cue turns out to be a really important skill. And so we've been in my house, and I really think this is worth thinking about. Even when your student is just starting 11th grade, let's start talking about developing the ability to perform on cue. Maybe that's standardized test, maybe it's something else, but standardized tests tend to be a pretty good way to start to develop that, and it dovetails with being prepared for college and having a good college application to put forward. If you're a senior, if your family if your kid's going to be a senior, at this point, you should be well on your way to application time. I
Hmm.
mean, you should be already down that rabbit hole of thinking about what you've written in the past that you can convert to be a good college essay, to start thinking about how you want to convey who you are and who you're not. Um, if you're at that point and you haven't even started to think about college applications at all, um, I would get down to business on that. Just because if you're December and you haven't touched an application, the application you're going to produce is going to be rushed. It's going to be hurried. It's going to reek of the stress and anxiety of trying to crank that thing out. And it's not going to portray who you really are to the best you could.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And there's a lot of rising, or I guess some places current seniors, rising juniors. And yeah, about standardized tests, I think the other, like, just to, you know, even finer point on it, you don't have to, if you feel like your tests are not representative of your success, or who you are, you don't have to submit them. So there's really really no downside. It's just going to like help you maximize options, and it's in your, I think, self-interest to have that data point, just because that's something you don't want to have to scramble to like try to do, um you know like in the middle of your senior year when you have a million other things going on. um,
I think it's really, I mean, just in my own case and for my son, the likelihood's quite high that he will apply to a bunch of schools that not a single one of them require a test score
mhm.
because they're all going to be small liberal arts colleges. And yet, I'm a fan of him developing that skill regardless of the score, because that skill is going to then translate to a level of confidence and ability when he gets to college that he's going to absolutely have to use.
Yeah, and you don't know where life is gonna take you. You might have to take, I don't know if you're getting, being certified as a teacher or taking the bar, LSAT. You just don't know, what other, what you might, what you might wind up doing. So I think, yeah, it's just a very like it's a very little like downside. I think, you definitely don't need to put so much stock into the specific score, and it's not, at many, many schools, that's not going to be a factor in your admissions process. But, definitely a lot of good reasons just for building that muscle, and also just like maximizing your college and scholarship, potential. So, last question, Mark. Where can students and families find you online? As I mentioned, we'll definitely include a link to Tuition Fit. But yeah, anywhere else you'd like to plug?
Yeah, folks can find me at Tuition Fit. You can use the contact part of the website, or you can reach me at mark@tuitionfit.org. I also run a nonprofit. It's called Pathways Planning and Insights, and we do an educational course for students and families to navigate all of the money side of this question. And if people want to check us out there, we do a lot of work with schools that have larger populations of low and moderate income students, families that are second generation American or first generation American, and English is not their first language. We do this series in about 20 different languages. So you can find me there too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Mark. I think there's a lot of really great insights from this conversation to help students make smarter money related decisions. And yeah, everyone check out Tuition Fit. Again, we'll put the link below. But thanks again, Mark, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, have a great day. Bye.
You too.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.